You will never look at hearing aid marketing the same way ever again. Hey guys, Cliff Olson, Doctor of Audiology and founder of Applied Hearing Solutions in Phoenix, Arizona, and in this video, I'm exposing the truth behind hearing aid performance claims and why you should never take them at face value. You know, I absolutely love reviewing different hearing aids on my YouTube channel. Since I started this channel over 8 years ago, I've probably reviewed somewhere over 100 different hearing aids, both prescription and over-the-counter. If I'm being honest, my favorite part of the review process is actually speaking to the engineers and audiologists who are responsible for developing these new technologies. Now, some of these hearing aids are amazing, and some of them are, Of course, everybody who works at these different manufacturers tells me that their new hearing aid is the absolute best hearing aid that's ever been developed. They even have research data to support these claims. But they all have research data to support their own claims. So if they all report that their hearing aids are the best, which one's actually the best? Well, that is exactly what I'm going to be explaining in today's video. But before I do me a huge favor, click the like button, really helps out the channel. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on, go ahead and do that as well. It is greatly appreciated. And let me know down in the comments section which hearing aid manufacturer you trust with their performance claims. Okay, so here's the deal. Every hearing aid manufacturer tries to make the best hearing aid they possibly can. In fact, all of the major hearing aid manufacturers, including Phonak, Oticon, Resound, Starkey, Widex, Insignia, all develop some amazing hearing aid technology. And they all take different approaches to try to get a leg up on the competition. But they also take different approaches when testing the performance of their hearing aids, especially when it comes to performance and background noise. I'm sure you can imagine that if you test a hearing aid in a very difficult situation, that hearing aid's performance is not going to look as good. On the other hand, if you test a hearing aid in a much easier situation, the performance of that hearing aid is going to look amazing. But the goal shouldn't be to test a hearing aid in an easy or even difficult environment. The point should be to test a hearing aid in a real-world environment. And that test should be performed exactly the same way with every single manufacturer's hearing aids, so we can actually compare apples to apples when it comes to performance. Now, you may have seen different hearing aid manufacturers promoting their SNR benefit data, which stands for signal-to-noise ratio. Of course, I have also promoted these different SNR benefits of these different hearing aids. Ideally, you want the signal-to-noise ratio benefit of a hearing aid in decibels to be as large as possible, meaning that that hearing aid is better at separating speech from noise. So if you have a hearing aid that has a plus 10 decibel signal-to-noise ratio score, that hearing aid would perform better in background noise than a hearing aid that had only a plus 5 decibel signal-to-noise ratio benefit. But here's the catch. Every hearing aid manufacturer could create their own testing protocol in order to show that their hearing aid has a much higher signal-to-noise ratio score than their competitors. All they have to do is figure out where the strengths of their hearing aids are at and build a test around those strengths. Let me give you a real-world example of how this actually works. Let's go ahead and take a look at two different hearing aids, one from manufacturer A and one from manufacturer B, both of who claim their hearing aid performs better than the other when it comes to signal-to-noise ratio benefit. Manufacturer A uses a 12-speaker testing protocol that involves playing speech mixed with noise directly in front of the hearing aid user, while playing noise from 11 additional speakers around the user to simulate a real-world environment like being in a restaurant. This manufacturer also uses speech babble noise and transient sounds like dishes and silverware clanking in the background, also more accurately simulating a real-world environment. Manufacturer B uses a 3-speaker testing protocol that involves playing speech directly in front of the hearing aid user, while playing noise from 2 speakers at 240 degrees and 120 degrees, which both happen to be in the perfect location to not be picked up by their hearing aid's directional microphones. This manufacturer also uses a solid-state static noise that can be easily identified by traditional noise reduction technology, instead of using real-world dynamic noise like manufacturer A uses. Now, before I show you the performance results of manufacturer A and manufacturer B, which one do you think actually performed better when it came to signal-to-noise ratio benefit? If you said manufacturer B, you would be correct. But if you're smart, which I have reason to believe that you are since you're watching my channel, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, hold on a second. Of course manufacturer B did better. Their testing protocol was substantially easier than manufacturer A. And you know what? You're right. But what do you say we take a look at how each one of these manufacturers' hearing aids did when we flip the script and have them take each other's testing protocol? Now, if you're assuming that manufacturer A would outperform manufacturer B if manufacturer A had to take manufacturer B's testing protocol, you'd actually be wrong. You see, if you take the artificial testing protocol of manufacturer B, which includes only 2 static noise sources, manufacturer B still outperforms manufacturer A, showing an SNR score of over 10 decibels for manufacturer B compared to a SNR score of only 8 decibels for manufacturer A. This is likely due to the fact that the testing protocol seems to have been set up to the strengths of manufacturer B's devices that use directional microphones with null spots at 240 and 120 degrees. But look what happens when you take the same static noise and instead of using a 2 noise source setup, you use the 12 noise source setup of manufacturer A. All of a sudden, the performance of hearing aid from manufacturer B drops off considerably, making both hearing aids perform almost identical from an SNR standpoint. Now look what happens when you take that same 12 noise source setup and make the noise substantially louder. All of a sudden, manufacturer A starts to outperform manufacturer B by a pretty wide margin. You see where I'm going with this, right? Might as well carry it all the way through to the finish line. What happens when we turn that static noise into more of a dynamic noise like you would typically experience inside of a noisy restaurant? Which hearing aid do you think ends up performing better? That's right, manufacturer A still comes out on top in the most real-world setup. And herein lies the 2 biggest problems when it comes to comparing performance data between different hearing aid manufacturers. If you do not test every hearing aid under the same standardized testing protocol, you will never get an apples-to-apples comparison of the performance data. And if you do not use a testing protocol that simulates a real-world environment, you'll never be able to take that performance data and assume that you'll get that amount of benefit in a real-life situation. This is a perfect example. When you test a hearing aid using static noise, you can see that both of these hearing aids performed very similarly. But when you put these hearing aids into a real-world situation, only one of them actually performed well in the real world. So how do we solve these problems ever since trying to compare the first 2 hearing aids ever created in history? Well, I have 2 thoughts on this. Solution number 1 would be for every hearing aid manufacturer to agree on a standardized testing protocol for real-world environments. Kind of like we have the ANSI testing standards for test box measures to ensure that every hearing aid manufacturer's devices are meeting manufacturer specifications. This way, all of the hearing aid manufacturers could follow the exact same testing protocol, and then we could compare different manufacturers with each other. However, I am not overly confident that we will ever get all of the major hearing aid manufacturers to agree to a single standard. Solution number 2, which I think is much more likely to happen, is that a third-party entity actually creates the testing protocol and tests all of the hearing aid manufacturers' devices. This way, we could completely remove any potential bias of a hearing aid manufacturer that puts their own hearing aids through this protocol. This is pretty much what HearAdvisor is doing right now with prescription hearing aids and over-the-counter hearing aids, and while their testing protocol is their own testing protocol, it at least allows us to make an apples-to-apples comparison of different devices. Either one of these 2 solutions would be substantially better than what we have to work with right now, which is every manufacturer creates whatever testing protocol that they want, which means that every single one of their hearing aids is going to look better when they publish their data. Until that time, either yourself or your hearing care professional are going to have to try to sift through all of the white paper data to determine what testing protocols were used and how these hearing aids actually performed in that testing protocol. But you still won't be able to have any data from a different hearing aid manufacturer and how their hearing aids would go through more of a real-world testing of one of the other manufacturers. Of course, you could still rely on the expertise of your hearing care professional and how they feel like certain hearing aids perform based on their clinical experience. But don't fool yourself. Most hearing care professionals just listen to whatever their hearing aid manufacturer reps tell them in terms of the performance of their particular devices, and a lot of clinics will end up skewing their recommendations based on the pricing that they get from their different manufacturers. Given that you're very limited when trying to compare apples to apples with different hearing aids, the thing that you should really be focused on is whether or not your hearing care professional follows comprehensive audiologic best practices. Best practices will ensure that you get the most amount of benefit from whatever hearing aid you choose to get, get, whether it's manufacturer A, manufacturer B, manufacturer C, or any of the other manufacturers. Unfortunately, just like it's incredibly difficult to compare performance data between different hearing aid manufacturers, it is incredibly difficult to find a hearing care professional who actually follows these best practices. However, if you would like to find an easy way to find a hearing care professional that does, make sure that you check out my website, hearingup.com, and find a Hearing Up Network member in your area. Hearing Up members have all been vetted using the exact same vetting process and are committed to following comprehensive audiologic best practices. This way, you can be confident that whatever hearing aids you get will be optimized properly, because after all, even the best hearing aid fit without following best practices will not perform its best. So if hearing your absolute best with your hearing aids is your #1 goal when it comes to hearing treatment, finding a Hearing Up Network member in your area is your best bet. At the end of the day, I am pretty sure that you could take any hearing aid, whether it's a prescription hearing aid, an over-the-counter hearing aid, a generic amplifier, or even an ear horn, and create a testing protocol that utilizes the strengths of those devices and limits the weaknesses, and have any one of those devices come out on top when it comes to performance data. So until the hearing aid industry changes its approach and standardizes a hearing aid testing protocol to simulate a real-world environment, I would take any performance data that you ever hear from a hearing aid manufacturer, or me for that matter, with a huge grain of salt.